Welcome to our week 7. I want to hit some highlights from chapters 10 and 11. This is going to be a little bit longer than my intro video because actually I'm going to hit a few of these topics, but I hope it'll be a good investment and save you from a lot of extraneous reading. So first off, as we get into chapter 10, it's really going to dig into the make or buy decision. Please keep in mind that that's also what we refer to as the decision to insource or make it yourself or outsource, meaning to buy it. So the make or buy, the insource versus outsource are the same topic. But I want to also tee this up, and I won't go into all these bullets, but they're there for you. I want to kind of put in mind that there are ethical issues behind outsourcing that we need to keep into consideration. Is it just slashing jobs? Or are there some real benefits to the organization? And certainly cost comes into consideration here, but it's not the only driver, and there's certainly some benefits to outsourcing when you have the time to do it. If you need the additional capacity, if the supplier might have better quality and better processes than we have internally, they may bring additional innovation to the table. But on the other side of it is the risks of having a poor performing supplier, losing control over what's going on, potentially losing confidential information through that supplier. So all that needs to be taken into consideration, and that's what this chapter will unload with, and I think it does a good job with some lists just to be able to bring those key points together. Key concepts. Workforce stability, that is referring to my internal group, and if I have a downturn in the demand for my product, can I hold on and keep my workforce stable? What if I have some additional demand? Can I just outsource that demand rather than adding people to just let them go again? Sometimes we have a multi-source policy where we intentionally will buy from outside as well as produce inside, kind of strategically to not be completely dependent on our internal workforce. Lots of different considerations. And there's also an article this week that will bring out some additional ones. So as reality is, of course, everyone's outsourcing now. There is somewhat of a bandwagon effect where groups are just outsourcing because everyone else is and not really thinking about it. That trend is starting to change some where we're really considering and saying, well, hold it, if we outsource, what are the additional costs? What are we opening ourselves up to if we insource? And so we're thinking about it a little bit more, whereas a few years ago, it was more of a default answer. Well, of course we're going to outsource it. And now we're considering that there might be better alternatives. Outsourcing certainly has its benefits, and at the bottom can result in certainly lower staffing levels, reduced costs, potentially being more flexible, that if we're good at outsourcing, then we can bring on a new supplier, bring on a new product, add that on, and then introduce another one, and to be very responsive in the marketplace and having resources beyond just the resources of our own organization. Strategic issues, though. Core competencies. First part is, what are the core competencies of my organization? I want to be careful to not outsource my core competencies because those are the things I'm really good at. I should be leveraging those myself. On the downside, I want to be careful of supplier dominance. I don't want them to have so much influence that they actually control what I decide and where I sell and what I sell. So we have to be careful that our outsourcing doesn't put us at risk of losing control of our organization. The creation of strategic vulnerabilities. Similarly, if I outsource everything, am I putting myself at risk that something could go wrong, my suppliers could merge, my suppliers could go out of business, so have I opened myself up to failure? The dangers of vertical integration. Keep in mind that vertical integration means that I'm going top to bottom in the supply chain. So I manufacture the item, I distribute the item, I have the retail stores. So that would be a vertical integration. And there's dangers to that. If I'm playing in all of those arenas, I've got to be managing all of those arenas simultaneously. And I may find that it's really healthier for me to allow other firms who have more expertise in those areas to be managing, let's say, the retail portion or the distribution portion or the manufacturing portion. About 2 weeks ago, I was meeting with Pandora, the jewelry company that we see at the malls. They are heavily vertically integrated. Almost everything they sell, they manufacture at their own plant in Taiwan. They stock it here in the United States. One of their major warehouses is right here in Columbia, Maryland. And you've seen their stores in the mall, and they're actually Pandora stores. Some of their product, I believe, is sold through outlets, retail outlets as well, but their primary outlet is their own stores, and that just sets you up that you're just having to manage the entire process. It might not be a successful alternative. Horizontal integration is looking the other direction to see if we can combine forces across the supply chain, and it's certainly something we can are good candidates for outsourcing if we say want to hand off our payroll operations or hand off our warehousing operations. We've got to decide and kind of push that out to the side. Strategically, I think I mentioned these, what we should never consider outsourcing, things that are critical to the success of our product. If it's the quality of the product, if it's the design of the product, if it's the packaging of the product, those are things that we want to hold on to and not potentially outsource. Dangers of outsourcing, kind of touched on these, but just a nice summary list, I think. And we've had other conversations about intellectual property, that last one, loss of confidentiality. Is there something in our design that by letting a supplier do it, potentially the supplier could leak that information to our competitors? Here's a little highlight bullets of some key things. I think I've touched on them, but you may want to flip to those sections in the chapter and take a little closer look before you try out the quiz. The quiz is just 10 questions. It's combined Chapter 10 and Chapter 11, 5 from each, and it'll give you 2 chances at completing that quiz. So you can take it once, and if you get a couple wrong, it'll tell you why you got them wrong. You can look it up to see what went wrong, and then take another shot at it. So you get 2 tries at that. Only the best one will count. Take a quick look at Chapter 11, sourcing. And this is post-decision. We've decided we're going to go out. Big item there, bidding versus negotiation. They sound similar, but they're actually 2 very different. We've talked a lot about bidding in the course. We're now going to start moving toward negotiation. Bidding is when we package up all our information and send it out to the potential supply base, have them read it, and then reply with their proposals. Negotiation is a little more interactive, where we would bring that supplier in and explain to them, and we could still send them our specifications, but we'd sit down and discuss it and say, how would you price that? Why would you price it this way? And let them ask questions about why we specified things a certain way, and really discuss and understand the cost, the price, where we are, the competition, everything. And so it's a much more interactive process. There's another highlight bullet coming up here where there's really an opportunity to get a clear understanding of what they're doing, what benefits they bring, and what I need. So negotiation is often a good alternative rather than just sending a bid out. Reverse auctions we've discussed before. There's a possibility to do a 2-step bid where I send the bid out to maybe 10 suppliers, and I get them back, and I select the best 4, and then I negotiate with them. And then those 4 I basically start over again with and say, okay, you made it to the final countdown. Now let's really talk about this and understand what you're bidding, how are you bidding it, what's it look like, what would you like out of the deal, and so we'd really work it out. And then there's some discussions here about how to send that information out, how to score the suppliers, and then who is really responsible, who makes the decision of which supplier we go with. Prerequisites to bidding. So let's put bidding on one side and negotiation on the other. If we're going to bid, it's going to have to be something that's a large enough dollar that suppliers are going to be interested. It has to be something that we can really define clearly so they know exactly what they're bidding. And as we've discussed recently, services are much more difficult, but we need to write an SOW, but specifications are more difficult in services. But in products, we also have to be careful that we can clearly define what we're trying to buy. If the market doesn't have a significant number of potential bidders, then it's no use going out. There won't be competition. We might as well just bring them in and negotiate. So if there's only 1 or 2 suppliers that are qualified, we should just bring them to the table and have a discussion. Sending a bid out when there's only 2 or 3 suppliers, they know they're the only people out there. You're going to get some very unrealistic bids back, and you probably will be taken advantage of. So negotiation would be a better alternative if there's not a significant competition. Sellers must be qualified, so you want to make sure you're going out to the right people, and they actually might need to want to have the business. And then you also need enough time to send that out, have them prepare their responses, send them back in, analyze those responses, and then just have any final discussions and make your award. So it can take 8, 10, 12 weeks to do a bid, and sometimes we don't have that amount of time. Now here, let's move over to the negotiation side. if we're not really clear on how much something is going to cost, and again, that's going to be tied also to, we really can't describe very well what we want, but we know we need it. We're better off to negotiate with a supplier that's an expert in that area, or a couple that are experts in that area, and find the one that's most likely suited and can provide us with reasonable pricing, and work with them. Price is often not the most important variable, so it might be service, it might be flexibility, it might be expertise. So there's something else that's driving the bid. If it's just about price, probably going to go to bidding. The purchasing firm, that's us, anticipates a need to make changes. So if it looks like, hey, this is what we want, but it's going to change in the near future, we're better off to negotiate that so we have an open dialogue. And that bottom one's a little different animal. If there's special tooling required or setup costs, so they're going to need to make molds or buy new equipment or open a new facility, that's a big undertaking with a large fixed cost. It's really very likely that we'd be better off to negotiate that as well. So this is kind of interesting. Even if the previous list is met, here are two more arguments for negotiation. And I mentioned this earlier. Negotiation is your most likely process for everyone to get a clear understanding of what's going on. So if there's any chance that this is going to fall apart over time, I'd rather negotiate, because then we're going to sit, we're going to talk about everything, we're going to fight it out. Negotiation also has that kind of combative element to it, that I'm going to try to work them down in price, they're going to try to get a higher price, and that's part of it. But it's more about getting to an understanding of what exactly do I want and how are they going to provide it. Competitive bidding, on the other hand, tends to result in a sacrifice. Usually you get a better price but lower quality product, or a better quality product and a lower price, and you don't know exactly how that combination has come together. Whereas with negotiation, we can work out and figure out exactly how high a quality I want, what price I'm looking for, what level of service I want, and we can work that out together. And I've been in one of those negotiations where the supplier said, oh, we've got design resources and production resources and this. I'm like, stop. I don't need your design resources. I have a full engineering staff. We know exactly what we want. I have drawings, I have samples, I have everything. Don't charge me for all those additional services. I'm not going to use them. I want your manufacturing capability. That's why we're talking. So that can be negotiated. When you're in a bidding process, it just doesn't usually come out in the discussion. Development of suppliers, often an overlooked area, and that is where we try to work with a supplier, maybe a supplier that isn't the best supplier out there, and give them part of the award, do a split award, give them maybe 10 or 20%, give 70, 80% to another supplier, and then work with that 20% supplier to turn them into a good supplier, help them gain experience, help them gain muscle in their own market, and then potentially next time I bid it, they might be the 80% guy. So they might actually create some competition that wasn't there in the past. We'll cover that a little bit more in the coming weeks, because we'll look at particularly minority supplier development. But this comes out in this context because part of it is single sourcing versus split award. Single sourcing means that when I award my business, I'm going to go to one supplier rather than splitting it between two. And there's pros and cons. It's always a trade-off on this. But here's some considerations that we might want to send all of the business to one provider. Often we have the choice of many suppliers, and we may consciously make that choice and say, no, I'm going to award this all to one, because there's some efficiencies there. There's some quality issues. There's some coordination issues that are better when we just deal with a single supplier. In my own experience, when I started with BG&E, we had a policy where we would always split award. We do pretty much a 50-50 split on all product awards, and we found it to be really counterproductive, because the suppliers neither one felt really responsible for the product. So if I call them and say, oh, I really need these, they go, well, just call the other guy. You split the award. And I call the other guy and he said, well, I don't have them. I figured you'd call the other guy. So I ended up getting no product. So we made a conscious decision to say, no, these are product awards. We're just going to go 100%, and then that supplier knows that they're responsible for the entire package. So for us, we made that decision to move away from split and go to single. But it can go either way. Here's a split award, what we call a split award or a dual award. You could split between 2 or 3, but it gets a little hard to manage sometimes. 70-30 is a popular way to go. But it also keeps someone, it keeps a backup in play, and it often keeps your primary supplier on their toes because, hey, if you start to fall down, I'm going to move the business to the 30% guy, and you're going to lose this option. So if you've got a big supplier that's trying to muscle you a little bit, sometimes it's better to split the award, and it kind of puts them on notice that there's somebody else, and we might build them up, and you might be out. So a split award isn't always bad. It isn't always good. Multiple sourcing, certainly you've got a backup. That fourth bullet's important, meet local content requirements. Sometimes we have to award a certain amount of business within our region, if that's a government contract or a local regional contract. And so we may say, well, our good suppliers out in California, we're going to give 80% of the business to them, but we need some local content, so we'll award 20% here in Maryland. So we may be required to do that. So it gives us some opportunities. A couple notes on this then. Strategic sourcing. We always want to take a strategic eye on this. Is there a reason we're going to 2 awardees, 3 awardees, or single? What's the benefit in the long term? Strategic sourcing. And oh, sorry, I have to back up on this. On strategic sourcing, we may be looking and say, well, there isn't much competition. There's only really one good player. That strategically we say, well, 5 years from now, I want to make sure there's more competition. So I'm going to award a little bit to the small guy and hope to build him up so that over time I'm not going to be in the same situation. I'll have multiple good suppliers 5 years from now. Talked about bidding versus negotiation, single versus sole source. I didn't mention sole source. Sole source is when there's only one supplier out there. And in that case, we're really stuck. And so we aren't making the choice to only go into one supplier. There is only one supplier. Might be a monopoly. And so in that case, we're going to negotiate with them just to get the best deal we can and hope that they perform. Split awards and then supplier development. So good luck. Take a look at this chapter. I hope I've given you some key points. You can then dive into the chapter and unwrap those a little bit more and then try out the quiz. Have a good week.